Hello everyone, Professor Cicerelli here. Got another video for you today. Today we're going to be talking about commas. Commas are probably the most misused punctuation mark. I would say that commas, um, people don't necessarily have a rhyme or reason to where they put commas. Few people know the rules that I'm about to explain to you about where commas go. They just, and I've heard this from students sometimes, that it just feels like the sentence needs a comma here. Sentence has been going on too long. It needs a comma. That can't be our method for how to decide where we put commas. We've got to have something better than that. It can't just be it feels right to put a comma here. So I'm going to go over I think 4 different places you need commas. I don't think this is not going to be all of the places you need commas. This is, I would say, because there are lots of other rules when it comes to commas. I'm giving you the 4 that will really, I would say, reduce your comma mistakes to being negligible. I can always do more videos on commas when it comes to writing a letter, in headings of letters, commas with commas when it comes to like quotations. I can talk about we can do that too. But I wanted to go over the 3 or 4 that where if you get these rules right, you will have most of your comma mistakes taken care of. I would say 95% of them go away if you get these 4 rules right. Now, I would definitely recommend, before we dive into this video, I would highly recommend you go back and watch my videos on clauses. Go back and watch the videos on clauses. Go back, and I'll link them up here. Go back and watch the video on clauses. Go back and watch my video on prepositional phrases. Okay, and it might even be the same video. But definitely that, and then definitely go back and watch the video on the 4 kinds of sentences. That's really gonna help you with this. Okay, so let's talk about commas and these four rules to remember. Okay, the first rule when it comes to placing commas is that you want to use commas when you're separating, as the book tells you right here. You want to use commas when you're separating 2 independent clauses when you're using a coordinating conjunction like and, but, for, etc. Okay, so I've seen a lot of problems with people not knowing where to place their commas when it comes to this first rule. So you see in this first example right here, comma before the coordinating conjunction. The comma does not come after the coordinating conjunction, it comes before it. Okay, so there's still some confusion, I think, with some students about where that comma goes when it comes to the coordinating conjunction. It always goes before. Now, let me just pause for a second and say that this rule is not saying that anytime you have a coordinating conjunction, and, but, for, etc., you put a comma before it. It's not saying that. It's only saying that you put a comma before that coordinating conjunction when that coordinating conjunction is connecting to independent clauses. This is why it's important to go back and watch that video on the types of sentences and on clauses. Okay, because an independent clause, as a reminder, we go over it in a lot more detail in that other video, but independent clauses have a subject and a verb and can stand on their own. Okay, subject and verb, and they stand on their own. So the way to check and see in this first example here, I do not love Shakespeare. Okay, is that an independent clause? It's got a subject, I. Verb, love. Do not is, we spoke about this in the verb video, but do not is a helping verb. Okay, do not love Shakespeare, and then Shakespeare is the object. Shakespeare is an object. So this has got a subject, a verb, and an object. Okay, and it's complete, stands on its own. subject and verb, and it does not begin with a subordinating conjunction like when, if, because. It's just subject, verb, object, stands on its own. Okay, now let's check and see what comes after the but. Do I have another independent clause? Okay. I still have those books. I, subject, it's the same subject as the first part of the sentence, but it's a new subject in that sense. Have, my verb, and then those books are my object. Okay, so I've got a subject, verb, and an object over there. So I've got an independent on one side of the but, I've got an independent on the other one. That tells me I've got two independent clauses here. Therefore, I need a comma here. And this would apply if my coordinating conjunction were and, but, or. It would not change. Okay. Now your book tells you, I think a helpful rule your book tells you is some writers, when it comes to the comma, when you've got two independent clauses with a coordinating conjunction, your book tells you some writers will leave out the comma here. Okay. And I like, especially if they're short independent clauses, your book tells you. And I like the suggestion your book gives you because it's not necessarily wrong to leave it out, but putting the comma in clarifies it and helps the reader understand the separation between one independent clause and another one. And so your book gives you, I think, the helpful suggestion here that it's never wrong to include it. Okay, and I would say, and I would argue, and you're going to see this in the next couple rules, I would argue that leaving commas out where it's definitely appropriate to put them can only lead to confusion. Putting commas in where they belong is never going to confuse the reader. It's only going to confuse the reader if you leave them out. Okay? And we're going to see this especially when it comes to looking at when we have items in a list. That sometimes leaving a comma out can actually confuse the reader. Okay. All right, so just to recap this rule, two independent clauses that you are connecting with a coordinating conjunction. If there is not a coordinating conjunction there, if but were not there, okay, I could not use a comma just to connect the two independent clauses because then it would be a comma splice. Then it would be a run-on sentence. If I didn't have this but here or and or so, etc. If I didn't have those, and I just had a comma without this, then it would be a run-on sentence. Okay, so I need that coordinating conjunction there, and if I have that coordinating conjunction connecting to independence, then I can put my comma. Okay. All right. Next, this is where watching that video on phrases and clauses is going to help. Okay. If you've got introductory phrases or a clause at the beginning of a sentence. Okay. Introductory phrase, remember what a phrase is. Go back and watch that video. I'll link it. Go back and watch that video on phrases. Okay. If I have a prepositional phrase to begin the sentence, okay, like I have here. Here I've got actually two prepositional phrases strung together. Okay. If I got a prepositional phrase, if I have a dependent clause, like I have here, okay, to begin a sentence, okay, or if I even have something as small as just a single word, like typically, or common phrases that we're not used to thinking of as prepositional phrases, like on the other hand, or a single word phrase like however. If I start a sentence with these introductory phrases, or clauses, separate them from the rest of the sentence with a comma. Okay, and you see examples of that here. So you got to be able to identify where your independent clause starts right here, and then where that prepositional phrase, in this case, where it ends, which is right here. Okay. I think we spoke in that video on prepositional phrases on why it's a good idea to separate prepositional phrases from your independent clause, right? I think I spoke about it. It just, for the short answer is that because a prepositional phrase ends with a noun and an independent clause also begins with a noun, you don't want to confuse your reader as to what the subject of the sentence is, because the reader is going to be, eyes are going to be going across the sentence, and then they're going to see a noun and then another noun, and they're not going to know necessarily which one is the subject of the sentence, and so you can clarify it for them with the comma. Okay, and notice that your book gives you the same advice. The book gives you the same advice as it did for the first rule, which is some writers leave out an introductory word or phrase, especially if it's a short one. But it's never wrong to include commas to set off those introductory phrases. So that's what I would suggest. I would always, maybe I sort of lean toward having more commas rather than fewer commas, but I think it just helps with clarity in sentences. So I would always err on the side of putting them with independent clauses and then putting them here if we're using introductory words or phrases. Okay. Our next rule is, and these first three are pretty straightforward. The last one's going to get tricky. The last one's a little tricky, and I'll spend a little bit more time, and we'll look at some exercises too together to help reinforce the last one and then some of the others. But items in a series. I think this is probably the comma rule that we all learned in grade school, which is that if you've got items in a list, then you use commas to separate them. Now, whatever it is that you're listing, it could be listing items, just nouns. Your book tells you the items in the list could be phrases or even clauses themselves. Okay, but if you are listing them, separate each of them with commas. Okay, so look at that first sentence. I spend a great deal of time thinking about the power of language, the way it can evoke an emotion, a visual image, a complex idea, or a simple truth. And you notice every single one of those: visual image, complex item, simple truth, emotion, each separated from each other with commas so that you can see them as separate items in a list. Okay. Now, your book tells you, and this is again going back to that point I made, that as a general rule, I think you can never confuse people by putting a comma where it belongs. You can obviously confuse people by putting commas not in the right place. That you can definitely do. But I don't think you can ever confuse people by including a comma where grammatically one is necessary. You can only confuse people by leaving them out. And so look at this last sentence here. It's an example. So Nadia held a large platter of sandwiches: egg salad, peanut butter, ham, and cheese. Okay, now, if we were not in the habit of including that last comma, by the way, because it is a subject of grammatical debate and discussion, is something called the Oxford comma. And if you're interested, there are lots of good videos, lots of good resources on the Oxford comma. My general thought is you can never confuse people by putting it in, but you can only confuse people by leaving out that Oxford comma. And look at this sentence that we have here. How might this sentence confuse the reader? If I didn't put that last comma there, how might this confuse my reader? Okay? My reader might think, maybe correctly, maybe not, that on the platter there were egg salad sandwiches, peanut butter sandwiches, and ham and cheese sandwiches. Okay? Are the ham and cheese combined as one sandwich, or are there ham sandwiches and cheese sandwiches separately? Okay? If I put that comma after ham, that's telling my reader ham is one item in my series, one kind of sandwich, cheese is another one. Okay? But if you are in the habit of always just leaving out that last comma because an English teacher back in high school said you don't have to put it, you might be writing there were ham and cheese sandwiches, but you might not mean there were ham and cheese sandwiches. You might mean there were ham sandwiches and cheese sandwiches, but the grammar of the sentence is saying something else. Okay, so that's why I think, for me, I always like to include that last comma just so that there aren't possible misunderstandings of meaning there. Okay, and we'll look at some of these later when we look at some exercises. Now the last one, this one is tricky, and this one I can even, I want to try to keep this video under half an hour, but if you want more info on this last one, on non-essential elements, let me know and I'll definitely make another video on it. So just leave me a comment and I will definitely make another one if you feel like you need more on non-essential elements. Now, what is a non-essential element? A non-essential element is sometimes called a non-essential modifier. Now we know that term modifier from I think we did a video on modifiers specifically. But a modifier is a word or phrase that describes, usually a noun, but sometimes it could be a verb, it could be other things. So, but usually that modifier is a word or phrase that describes another noun. Okay, like adjectives are modifiers. And so when we're looking at modifiers here, we're looking at usually more than just one word. Usually it's longer. Usually it's an entire phrase. Now, what this rule is telling us is that when we have non-essential modifiers, in other words, when we have modifiers that are not necessary to the sentence, they're extra information that's good to have, but it's not essential to understanding the meaning of the sentence. Okay? If we've got information like that, that's good to know, but not essential to the meaning, we usually separate that non-essential information with commas on both sides of that non-essential information. If that non-essential information appears in the middle of a sentence, that non-essential modifier appears in the middle of a sentence, then usually you have commas on both sides to let the reader know this is not necessary. You don't need to know this, but here it is anyway. Okay? If you have necessary information, your book uses fancy terms like non-restrictive, just non-essential or essential. If you have modifiers that are essential, okay, in other words, we need to know this information about the noun usually, then you don't need commas. Okay? So non-essential, non-necessary, and not necessary, you need commas, and commas on both sides. If it's essential information, necessary information, you don't put commas. Okay? Now let's look at this first example under non-essential. Okay? Spanish, which is a Romance language, is one of the 6 official languages at the United Nations. Okay. Now, if I'm putting commas on both sides of which is a Romance language, I'm putting commas on both sides there, what I'm telling the reader is this is extra information. You don't need to know it. In fact, if I took it by putting commas on both sides of it, what I'm telling the reader is I could take this out of the sentence and the sentence would still make perfect sense. And so if I took out which is a Romance language, does the sentence still make sense? Yeah, it does. I haven't changed the meaning of the sentence. If I take this out of the sentence, I have not changed the meaning of the sentence. So if I just said Spanish is one of the 6 official languages at the United Nations, that's the meaning of the sentence is still entirely clear. Okay. You'll notice what your book says. The detail about being a Romance language adds information, but it's not essential to the meaning. Okay. Now, look down here. So this is a. So we're going to look at the detail about where the language is spoken. Okay, here. Okay, so that's our modifier. Okay, And you'll notice, as a general rule, we can. I don't think I did a video on that in which, but I can if you want. Let me know. But generally speaking, if you're using which, you're telling the reader this is non-essential information, and if you're using that, you're telling the reader it's necessary information. So if I've got, chances are, if I've got that, it means it's necessary. If I'm starting it, if the modifier is starting with which, chances are it's not necessary. Okay. So Navajo is the Athabascan language that is spoken in the Southwest by the Navajo people. Okay. Or actually, so this would just be the. Oh yeah, no, this whole thing. Yeah, sorry, this whole thing. Okay, so if I took this, so now no commas here, so I don't have a comma before. No, I don't need a comma after because it's the end of the sentence. But I have the sentence has not put a comma before this. Now, let's look at why. Okay. Here I said to you that because this has got commas with it, I could take it out of the sentence, and sentence would not change meaning. If I took this out of the sentence, okay, if I took this entire modifier out of the sentence, does the sentence change meaning? You bet it changes meaning, right? Navajo is the Athabascan language. That doesn't tell me anything, right? It tells me that it's an Athabascan language, but it doesn't tell me anything about it. It actually changes the meaning to take out where it's spoken and by whom it's spoken, right? That changes the meaning of the sentence completely, right? So I need no commas there, right? If I put commas, that's telling me I could just take it right out of the sentence, and I can't in this case. These are good examples. I always like looking at. I think this is really helpful, looking at sentences like this. This also applies when you're doing like titles of books. It's really relevant for like titles of books. Okay, so look at this first sentence here. Okay, what is this sentence telling us grammatically by putting commas on both sides of Mary? What is it telling us grammatically? Okay, remember, back up here. Okay. It's telling us, hopefully you got it, it's telling us that Mary's name, okay, Mary in this case is our modifier. Mary is describing or modifying my sister. Okay. It's telling us that Mary's name is non-essential information. Okay, commas on both sides, just like up here. Commas on both sides tell us non-essential information we have. Okay. So what does that mean then? If Mary's name isn't essential, what does that mean? What that means is I only have one sister. Okay, I only have one sister. The author of this sentence is telling us I've only got one sister. So you don't even need to know her name. The name is extra. Okay? Because think about it. If I only had one sister and I just said my sister, you'd know exactly who I'm talking about. Right? You'd know the name. Right? My sister and Mary are identical because I only have one sister. So the name becomes extra information in that case. Right? But look at the second sentence. Exactly the same sentence, just punctuated differently with no commas in this case. Okay, so Mary is still my modifier, single word in this case, but she's still my modifier. Okay, she's still modifying my sister. Okay, but now what is the grammar of the sentence telling me? I don't have commas here. So the grammar of the sentence is telling me that Mary is essential information. Essential information. Okay, so what does it mean then that Mary's name is essential to you understanding the meaning of the sentence? What it means is if I took her name out of the sentence, it would now change the meaning of the sentence, or it would confuse somebody. Okay. Now, why would it confuse somebody if I took Mary's name out? Well, the only way it would confuse somebody is if I had more than one sister, and now you don't know whom I'm speaking about, right? So the only reason Mary's name is essential here is because I've got more than one. And if I took her name out of the sentence and I just said, my sister just published her first novel, if I had more than one sister, your next logical question would be, well, which sister? Because I've now changed the meaning of the sentence if I have more than one sister. Okay? All right. So if you got questions, leave them down for me below. I'll answer them. But that's generally the rule with this last bit on non-essential elements. With non-essential elements or extra information, extra modifiers, extra modifiers that are not essential to the sentence, commas on both sides generally. If I have modifiers that are necessary to understanding the sentence, no commas. Okay, so let's look at some exercises. Let's look at this one. So this is an exercise that is testing you on, what is this one? This is testing you on the non-essential elements. Okay. So let's look at, let's do this one. Let's skip down here. All right, let's start here. How about I'll do one, and then I'll let you guys do a couple down in the comments below. So let's look at question 2. So what the question's asking us is it punctuated correctly, right? Do I have commas where they belong, or do I have essential information in the sentence that should not have commas? Do I have non-essential information that needs commas? That's what this is asking you to look at. Okay, so the following sentence may contain comma errors. Remember that non-essential elements require commas, but essential elements do not. Okay, so we're trying to decide whether the commas are used correctly here. Okay, so let's look at the original sentence. Inventors who wanted to design a true motion picture camera competed to introduce the first one. Okay, so right now I've got only a comma here. Okay, just one comma. Already I'm something's not right, because we said that if a modifier that's non-essential shows up in the middle of a sentence, it should have commas on both sides of it. So right away something's up here with this sentence. But let's look. Inventors who wanted to design a true motion picture camera. So what did they do? They competed to introduce the first one. Okay, so inventors is my subject. Competed is my verb. Okay. And this information here, who wanted to design a true motion picture camera, that is my modifier. Now let's look at it. What kind of modifier is it? It begins with, and we talked about this in another video, who. Who is a relative pronoun. Who connects nouns to adjective information, like we have here. Okay. Specifically, who connects subjects to adjective information, which is what we have here, because we just said inventors is the subject of our sentence. Okay. So what we're trying to decide is this highlighted part necessary or extra information? Let's look at it. Okay, so if I put commas on both sides here, and then we would put another one here if it were non-essential. We put another one here. What that's telling me then is that who wanted to design a true motion picture camera, that's extra information. I don't need it. I could take it out of the sentence. Okay. Is that the case here? Could I take out who wanted to design a true motion picture camera? Would it change the meaning of the sentence? Yeah, I mean, it really would, right? Let's do it. Inventors competed to introduce the first one. First one of what? I don't even know what you're talking about, right? If I take that out, the whole sentence now doesn't make any sense. I've completely changed the meaning of the sentence. Okay, so what that's telling me then is this highlighted modifier is necessary. Okay. Because it's necessary, what does that mean? What does that mean? Essential means no commas, right? Okay, so what that means is it should be what? This one, C. Okay. How about we do one more, and then I'll send you off on your own. Let's do. Okay, let's do this one. Wait. No, let's not do 7. Okay, let's do this. Let's do 8. Let's do 8, and then I'll have you do. How about we'll do 8 together, and then do 9. Do 9 down in the comments below, and then I'll pin the right answer for that. So let's do 8 together, and then do 9 down in the comments. Okay, so we're trying to decide whether we've got comma usage is correct or it's incorrect based on what we've been talking about with essential and non-essential. Okay, so the Frenchman, Georges Mallet, and then those are his dates of birth and death, came up with an idea of telling a story in a movie. Okay. Now here we have, just like the sentence we looked at before, we have just one comma and no second comma after that. So already I'm on guard because, like I said, if a modifier is showing up in the middle of a sentence, it's going to have commas on both sides of it. So right off the bat, I'm skeptical that this is. Already, I'm thinking this isn't right. But now, how do I fix it? Okay, so let's look. So, what's my subject here? Subject is usually toward the front of the sentence, right? Or rather, that way, front of the sentence. Whoop. That way, toward the front of the sentence. So, the Frenchman would be my subject, right? What's my verb? Came up, or came up with. Okay. So his name, Georges Mallet, just like the name of the sister here. We're trying to decide whether whether that name is necessary or extra. If it's necessary, no commas. If it's extra, commas. Okay, where would the commas go? They would go before his name, and probably after the date of birth and death. Okay. So is that what we should do? Let's decide. Is his name extra information? Is this extra information? Extra information means, or non-essential information means, means commas on both sides, but it also means I could pluck it out of the sentence and the sentence still makes sense. I haven't changed the meaning of the sentence. Is this true? Why not? Let's look at it. The Frenchman came up with the idea of telling a story in a movie. Which Frenchman are we talking about? We've completely changed, by taking out his name, we've completely changed the meaning of the sentence. Okay? So what does that tell us? It tells us his name is necessary information. Because his name is necessary information, we don't need commas here. Okay. Let me ask you, so no commas, so what would the fix be? It would be this one. It'd be B. Okay. Let me ask you this though. Let's switch it up a little bit. So I just said the subject of this sentence, and this is extra. This is not part of the question, but my little changing things up. If I switched the sentence so that his name were my subject instead of the Frenchman, okay, does that change how I punctuate the sentence? So now it's saying Georges Mallet, the Frenchman, came up with the idea of telling a story in a movie. And you might even have heard the pause when I was reading that. Georges Méliès, the Frenchman, came up with the idea of telling a story in a movie. If we flipped it, and this were my subject, and then I had the Frenchman as my modifier, then my modifier would actually be non-essential. It wouldn't be necessary. Why is that? Why is that? Because if I have his name, if I have this person, then anybody who knew who he was, right, would also know he's a Frenchman. He's from France. So if I had him as my subject, okay, I'm assuming it's he. If I had him as my subject, then the fact that he is a Frenchman, yeah, Frenchman, yeah, so yes, Frenchman, so it's got to be a guy. The fact that I have the Frenchman then as my modifier, it means it's extra information. Because if you know who Georges Méliès is, then you know that he's a Frenchman. But if I reverse it the way the sentence is written here, the Frenchman, if I just said the Frenchman, you don't know who the heck I'm talking about. I could be talking about him. I could be talking about any other person who's from France, right? So you see how if I change the order of those, if I make Georges Méliès my subject, and I make the Frenchman my modifier, it changes how I punctuate this, okay? Then if I had Georges Méliès, the Frenchman, then I would have Georges Méliès, comma, the Frenchman, comma, came up with the idea of telling a story in a movie, okay? All right, let's do number 9 on your own. Leave it in the comments below, okay? I want to try one exercise with you on independent clauses, and then I'll give you one to try on your own. Okay, let's look at this one. So we'll do 4 together, and then I want you to do good. 7 on your own. We'll do 4 together, and I'm being a little tricky with 7, so careful with 7. And then do 7 on your own. Leave it down in the comments. So let's try 4. Okay, so here we're looking for using a comma with coordinating conjunctions and independent clauses. So let's look. Okay. Quartz clocks are more precise than pendulum clocks, those clocks that have the swinging pendulum. So quartz clocks are more precise than pendulum clocks, yet atomic clocks surpass both in precision. Okay. So, quartz clocks, subject, verb, are, okay, and then more precise than pendulum clocks, this is adjective information about the clocks. Okay, so quartz clocks, subject, are, verb, this, adjective information. Okay. Atomic clocks surpass both in precision. Atomic clocks, maybe you didn't notice it, it is a new subject. It's a new subject and it has a new verb. What's my new verb? Surpass. To be better than. Okay. So I've got a subject, got a verb. Okay, so I've got a subject, I've got a verb. Do I have an independent clause connected to another independent clause with a coordinating conjunction? Okay, so I've got an independent here. I've got an independent here. Whoops. Here is yet a coordinating conjunction. Yep. See it? It is. Okay. So how do I fix this? That one. Right? I would not put my comma, as we said when we were discussing it before, I would not put my comma after the coordinating conjunction. When I've got a coordinating conjunction, like I said, when I've got a coordinating conjunction connecting two independent clauses, that comma always goes before the coordinating conjunction, not after it. Okay, so I would, that's why C would be incorrect. Okay, goes here. Okay, so try 7 on your own. It's being a little tricky there. Try 7 on your own. Leave it down in the comments below. Let me know if you want any more explanation on any of these 4 rules for commas. Let me know down below, and I'm happy to do that. Especially if it's on non-essential modifiers. That is a tricky one. That's a really hard one for people to wrap their head around. So if you want more info on this, just let me know. And like I said, this video was not to give you every single possible place you need to put commas, but to give you 4 that are really going to cut down on your comma mistakes. Probably 95% of your comma mistakes go away if you can master these 4. Okay? All right. Have a good day, everybody. See you next time.